blood sugar issues we don't look at, a person has migraines, high cholesterol, a little bit of excess body fat, and, gut issues. My mind doesn't jump to like, oh, they have blood sugar issues, but they probably do, right? So all these things that are seemingly unrelated just get worse with the blood sugar dysregulation. So it could be hard to pin down, but knowing the science can really help.
Today's episode is with Danielle Hamilton. Danielle is a functional nutritional therapy practitioner and restorative wellness practitioner who specializes in blood sugar regulation and digestion. Her mission is to help others uncover their blood sugar and insulin issues, as well as help them optimize digestion. So in this episode, Danielle and I are chatting about all things blood sugar related, how blood sugar impacts our overall health, early signs of blood sugar dysregulation, dietary and lifestyle strategies for improving blood sugar regulation, and lots more. So I really enjoyed this conversation with Danielle, and I think you're going to learn a lot from this episode. So I'm excited for you to hear it. Let's dive into it. Welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and I'm here with Danielle Hamilton. What's up, Danielle? How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. We just chatted last week on your podcast, which was super fun. I feel like I don't even know how long, it was probably like over an hour that we talked, right?
Probably, yeah.
So I'm assuming that's probably going to happen again today because we have so much in common and I like talking to you, so it's fun.
Yeah, it'll be a good episode.
Yeah, so we're going to be diving into all things blood sugar. That's kind of your wheelhouse. So I'm really excited to kind of have an episode and chat all about that. I do get lots of questions on that for my clients and just in kind of the keto metabolic flexibility realm. So excited for that. But before we dive in, do you want to just give our listeners and viewers a little bit of your background? Just tell us your story and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sounds good. So my story kind of starts in childhood. I was a little bit of a sickly kid. I had a lot of ear infections and eczema and colds and strep throat. And by the time I was in high school, my senior year of high school, I got strep throat 6 times in a year. And, with that comes tons of antibiotics. And I got my tonsils out, which was terrible to do at 18. And then the next year I went to college. And of course, my diet and drinking and everything got worse. And I developed really bad seasonal allergies out of nowhere. And I also got asthma and I started taking multiple medications. And then I moved to Miami for graduate school and season became all year round. And I was allergic to palm trees. I was like, this feels like a cruel joke. So living in Miami, super allergic to palm trees and every other thing under the sun. And I was on multiple medications and inhalers and getting all these allergy shots. I was allergic to so many things and becoming more allergic to things as I was getting these shots that I had to get 5 different shots at a time. It was just like, it was ridiculous. I was going broke from the copays. So I was working as a speech therapist at the time. And I asked them to let a nurse from my job give me the shots. And then the nurse taught me how to do it. So I was giving myself 5 shots in the stomach every other day. This is my early 20s. Like, this isn't, like my late 50s. And, my health was deteriorating. And meanwhile, I also struggled with acne. I struggled with weight my whole life. And I also was struggling with chronic sinus infections. And the number one symptom I was getting of that was just terrible fatigue. I was just so tired. I'd drop a pen at work and just start crying. I'm like, my bucket of stress was so filled up. And I was like, why is this happening to me? And no doctor could tell me. They were like, oh, I guess it's just genetics. And it's like, seriously, no, not one person asked me about my diet, what I was eating, what I was doing, how I was living. And so they were just happy to give me all these medications. So in 2012, I found the book, The Paleo Diet Solution by Robb, and I read that book and it changed my life. And I felt like everything that I had been taught up until that point was just flipped on its head and basically do the reverse. So, I lived through the 80s and 90s, low fat everything, and it wasn't low fat anymore. It's like, hey, you can eat fat, you can eat the red meat instead of chicken breast. And you can put salt on your food. You don't have to eat granola bars, like don't eat processed foods. And so I cut out these processed foods. I ate real food, and it was like a miracle. My health just totally changed. And I got rid of all my allergies and asthma. I got off all my medications, no more shots, no more sinus infections. And I was just like wanting to shout this stuff from the rooftops, because I'm like, oh my goodness, did you know that everything we've been taught is wrong? And food is so incredible and it can heal you and all this stuff. So then in 2013, I had a really stressful year. I moved to New York City, and it was dark and it was cold and I was outside, and it was so stressful. And I was eating the same foods, but my health started to take a turn again. And all of a sudden I was welcomed to the wonderful world of female hormones. And I was getting all these hormonal symptoms. I lost my period. I was gaining weight. I had always struggled with acne, but now it wasn't like a random period or two around my cycle. It was full face of acne. My forehead was covered. I had cystic pimples on my cheeks. I'm like, what is happening? Like, I was just so healthy from this diet. I haven't really changed anything. And now my health is falling apart. And I knew in my heart, the answer wasn't go back to doing what you were doing, because that didn't work for me either. But I was just really stumped. So during this time, I was still researching and learning a lot about food and nutrition, because I had fallen in love with paleo and kind of got into it from then. So I looked up on the internet and I found out I had PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I had a lot of the symptoms of that. And I was looking at the advice at the time, and it was like, don't have gluten, don't have dairy, don't have refined sugar. I was like, check, check, check. I do all those things. So I felt like I was doing everything right, yet my body wasn't reacting well. And so my message to myself was like, God, my body hates me. It's rebelling on me. And that's a really dark place to be in. So I eventually went to mainstream gynecologist, and I was like, listen, I think I have PCOS. I'm working out all the time. I can't lose weight. I'm eating really healthy. I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to make this better. And he goes, you do have PCOS. There's no cure. You have to lose weight and you have to take the pill. I was like, what kind of advice is that? So I didn't feel disheartened by that. I felt like, no, I don't believe you. I said a lot of expletives in my head, and I was like, no way. So I took the prescription for the pill, ripped it up when I got in my car, and I was like, there's no way. I'm like, there's no way this isn't reversible. Just him telling me that just made me totally not believe it. And it gave me sort of lit this fire to really, figured out on my own. So fast forward, and it was 2018, and I'm driving in my car, and I hear a podcast from Dr. Jason Fung and Megan Ramos. They talk a lot about fasting, and Megan said that PCOS is the diabetes of the ovaries. And I nearly drove my car off the road, because I was like, oh my goodness, what do you mean diabetes? I don't know anything about diabetes except for something about amputations and something about blood sugar. So it was something that was not on my radar. Even after all these years of learning about nutrition on my own, it was just never there. So I realized that insulin resistance and blood sugar stuff was at the root of my PCOS. It was driving the PCOS. And it was why I couldn't make a dent in my symptoms when I was trying to impact my testosterone and my progesterone with different supplements and things like that. It just wasn't making a dent because it wasn't at the root of what was going on. And so when I learned that blood sugar issues were sort of at the root, I took a look at my diet and was like, well, I eat paleo, I eat healthy sugar. Like I always used to have a sweet tooth. Like I knew that, it was always, a bun with ketchup at a barbecue instead of a hamburger, and like cereal and breakfast foods and yogurt with like Jello jigglers on the top. Like what were we eating in the 90s,
Yeah.
And so I looked at my paleo diet and I was like, well, do I eat a lot of sugar and carbs? I was like, okay. So I have a banana blended in my iced coffee with coconut milk. I have coconut sugar, maple syrup, paleo treats, acai bowls, smoothies, sweet potatoes, plantain chips, kombucha. I'm like, oh yeah, I think my sweet tooth disguised itself under the guise of being healthy and paleo, right? And so I didn't realize just how many carbohydrates and sugar I was consuming. And my thought was that it was okay. It was healthy sugar because it was natural. It was from the earth. It wasn't, a Pop-Tart. It was strawberries and bananas. So I really quickly learned that that was way too many carbohydrates for my body. And when someone is in a state of insulin resistance, another way of putting it is a state of carbohydrate intolerance. So my body just could not tolerate that amount of carbohydrates at that time. So what I did was I took out all those dense sources of carbohydrates. I had to take out everything, including fruit, including things like even stevia, because I had like this intense, I called it a sugar dragon. So the sugar dragon, anytime it got even a whiff of like a raspberry or a monk fruit, it would be like, I need more sugar. And it's like, oh my gosh, these cravings are crazy. So I had to get rid of all of that. And then I added fat. And basically I had a keto paleo diet, and I added intermittent fasting with that. And again, it was like this miraculous change that it was like just what my body needed. I dropped the weight, my acne went away, my periods were regular, and it took several months, but finally all that PMS, all those symptoms went away. And now the only reason I know my period's coming is because an app on my phone is like, your next cycle is about to begin. I'm like, oh, really? So yeah, it's amazing what can change when you really hit the nail on the head and get those root causes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, we did dive like on your podcast, we dove into kind of like your story. And then afterwards, we talked a little bit about like how you transitioned to incorporating carbs back in after the time of healing. So definitely, if you're listening to this podcast, go listen to that one. I'll link it in the show notes because that was an awesome conversation. Obviously, we talked all about metabolic flexibility, but kind of got a little bit more or deeper into your story after that. So that's awesome. So I want to dive a little bit into blood sugar, kind of just in general to start off, so people can kind of understand like how regulating your blood sugar and how blood sugar in general affects like just overall health and what that, maybe we can talk a little bit about that, and then we can dive into some specifics from there.
Sure. So blood sugar controls how we feel every second of the day. And also it has really big impacts on our long-term health. Our blood sugar affects every cell in our body, every organ in our body, and every physiological process in our body, like our sleep or our energy levels. So because every single cell has receptors for insulin and blood sugar, every cell can be affected by it. So when we have blood sugar issues, it can affect all these different cells in our body. But basically how blood sugar and insulin work, because they go hand in hand, and you'll kind of see why they're so related and so important, is that when we eat carbohydrates and sugar, it gets digested and that sugar goes into our blood. And that sugar is glucose. The fructose has to go to the liver for processing. So eating lots of high fructose corn syrup and all that can really lead us to fatty liver. Overabundance of fruit can also contribute to that as well. So, but basically we're focused on glucose. So when we say blood sugar, we're talking about blood glucose levels. So the sugar goes in our blood, and our body likes to have like about a teaspoon at all times, just there for like quick fuel if it needs it. And as the sugar is going up, as we're digesting, the pancreas senses this and will will excrete this hormone called insulin. And insulin's job is to unlock the cells of the body to let the sugar inside, so the sugar can do things like make energy, or it's stored for later if it's not used right then, and it's stored as body fat. So insulin's job is to put the sugar in the cells of the body, and that brings the level in the blood down. So that's why we say insulin lowers blood sugar, because it lowers the amount in the blood, puts it in the body for use, like the muscles and the brain and the heart and the liver, et cetera. So over time, we want to think about having stable blood sugar levels, because what is really problematic are these highs and lows. So when the blood sugar goes up really, really high, that's inflammatory just by itself. So when usually we say it's over about 140 milligrams per deciliter. There's a lot of different research out there, and there's not one exact threshold where it's like, this is good, this is terrible. It doesn't really work like that. But in general, over that number is going to start to have some negative impacts. The higher you go for the longer, the worse the impacts are. And we know that there's a whole inflammatory cascade and things that also damage the linings of blood vessels in the body. So that's why we see with diabetics a lot of issues with the eyes and with the kidneys, because that's where there's a really high concentration of tiny, tiny capillaries, these tiny blood vessels. And so they're impacted first. So what the sugar does is it almost kind of like if you put a piece of toast in the toaster oven, which I'm sure most of your listeners aren't eating right now, but maybe in the past. So you put toast in the toaster and it kind of browns, and that's what we call advanced glycation end products, or AGES. And that's how sugar actually ages us. And so it causes this like hardening and stiffening, but that's not going to happen one time after you eat it, right? Our body has built-in mechanisms for this, but it's the continual spiking over time. And that spike is going to give us a big hit of insulin. And that insulin is going to, if we do it a lot, if we're kind of spiking all the time, the insulin is going to be there all the time, and it can also send the blood sugar down too low. And then we can start to have symptoms there of early signs of blood sugar issues. Some of those are things like being shaky, being dizzy, being lightheaded, feeling anxious, a lot of brain symptoms. So anxiety, irritability, brain fog, depression, headaches, and feeling nauseous, feeling sweats, heart palpitations. These are all signs that either your blood sugar is too high, that it's plummeting too quickly, or that it's actually gone too low. So the body likes to have blood sugar in this happy range. So on a continuous glucose monitor, you'll see this happy green range, and that's where you want to keep it. So it's not that it has to be a flat line. It's going to fluctuate, and that's totally normal, but we don't want really steep mountains and valleys, because that's where the dysregulation comes in. And then you start to get longer term effects of this. So the long-term effects of that continual spiking are that it starts to impact all the areas of your body. So if you start with the brain, all those symptoms that I said, and then as those things get worse, then maybe you get diagnosed with an anxiety disorder or depression, or you have memory loss. Diabetes is Alzheimer's is being called type 3 diabetes, right? So we know that it has these profound impacts on the brain. We know that it causes macular degeneration, that our mouth is, sugar leads to cavities and gum disease. With our skin, it leads to things like acne or darkening of the skin, or just different issues that diabetics have with their skin that only happens in diabetics. And then moving down, sugar and insulin impact our heart. It causes atrial fibrillation because it depletes our magnesium stores, which relaxes the muscles. It leads to hypertension and heart disease. We know that it impacts our gut and the microbiome. It's feeding all these bad bacteria. It feeds this overgrowth of yeast and candida. It impacts our liver, gives us fatty liver, and liver is a huge organ of blood sugar regulation. These blood sugar swings impact the adrenal glands, where we have this constant swing of the blood sugar. The adrenals are really involved in our stress hormones. And so that's very stressful on the body when the blood sugar is crashing, when the blood sugar is way too high. And so it depletes the adrenals, and that further dysregulates all your hormones. And then it really leaves you very tired, or having these energy crashes. Maybe at night, you're kind of tired and wired. Mm-hmm. And so that we get that cortisol dysregulation. Again, I mentioned the kidneys already. And then of course, reproduction. So we know that insulin resistance, it leads to infertility. It's the number one cause of infertility in women, and high blood sugar levels and insulin resistance also cause infertility in men. So basically you just choose an organ of the body. And I know I missed a bunch, but it's like, we know that blood sugar can impact that. And those are the longer term effects. We know that it, raises cholesterol and all those things. And that's why blood sugar issues we don't look at, a person has migraines, high cholesterol, a little bit of excess body fat, and, gut issues. My mind doesn't jump to like, oh, they have blood sugar issues, but they probably do, right? So all these things that are seemingly unrelated just get worse with the blood sugar dysregulation. So it could be hard to pin down, but knowing the signs can really help.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different signs, like you mentioned. So I guess one question I have for you. So obviously we know, you mentioned the continuous glucose monitor, and that's kind of newer technology. Even just within the last, I would say 2-ish years, it's become more mainstream, even probably the last year, versus, before that, only you could only get a continuous glucose monitor if you were diagnosed with diabetes, right?
Yeah. And an insulin dependent diabetic. So even I have some clients who are type 2 diabetic, and they ask their doctor for a prescription and they say no. So this is, in mainstream, it's not seen as a tool for prevention. It's seen as a tool for management of uncontrolled diabetes.
Gotcha. Okay. So do you, like, when you were, I guess, going through your kind of epiphany, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
You obviously didn't have a continuous glucose monitor. Is that something like you were
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, you can go.
Yeah, I use a finger prick meter, which I happen to have right here on my desk. So I use the finger prick meter to kind of judge where I was at. So before, when I had PCOS, I went to the doctor several times to do fasting blood work. And my blood sugar was 60, which is very low. And I felt super dizzy. I felt like I was going to pass out. I felt like I was going to eat my arm off. It was terrible. And I was like, oh, I hate fasting. I was a person who needed to eat before I went out to eat. God forbid I left the house without like a granola bar in my purse. So sometimes we don't experience signs of blood sugar issues, but we always have food with us. We're grazing, we're snacking, we're sort of intuitively preventing these lows, preventing hunger, because hunger feels horrible. Hunger feels unmanageable. And that's how my hunger felt. It was really unhealthy hunger. It was accompanied by symptoms of a blood sugar crash. But I use the blood sugar meter to kind of see where I was at. So one of the things that mainstream medicine gets wrong about blood sugar, we could have a whole podcast on that. But one of the things that they get wrong is when they tell you to test. So they'll tell you maybe test before your meal and test 2 hours after. But from wearing a continuous glucose monitor, that a lot of things can happen in that 2 hours. It can look extremely different, but have the same 2 points. So let's say we start at 80 and then we take it 2 hours later and it's 80. It could have been a flat line, or it could have spiked to 200. Like, we don't know what it did in that time. So if you don't have access to a continuous glucose monitor, getting the finger prick meter can be really helpful. And what I recommend is sort of mimicking what the CGM does. So you test it right before you eat, and then about every 15 to 20 minutes after for about 2 hours, or until it kind of comes back to baseline. And again, you don't want to do this every single day, every single meal, because you'll be a human pincushion, right? But that will give you an idea. And then you can graph these points and see sort of what your curve did. And what's really good about that, or using the CGM, is that you can finally start to connect your symptoms with what's going on with your blood sugar. So I have clients that say, I get these headaches, I get super anxious, I get irritable and shaky after I eat some foods, and I don't know what's happening. So I had them plot their blood sugar. And surprisingly, she's like, when it got to the peak, that's when I started feeling all those symptoms. So it's not even when it's a low. Sometimes it's at the peak of a glucose curve. So it can happen, like I said, anywhere along that line. But we know it's very related to the blood sugar. And then with a continuous glucose monitor, those are really helpful because you don't have to prick yourself, and you can just get that whole view. You can see what's happening at night. And so it's really, really valuable information.
Yeah. I mean, the technology with the continuous glucose monitors, and now that it's available to like so many people now. I know we both talked off air. We use NutriSense.io. Is that how you say it? I always just say it like .io, or just call it NutriSense. I actually had Cara Collier on the podcast back in, I think it was just right when they were kind of coming out. It was back in 2020. I actually looked earlier today. And we had a whole episode on, like blood sugar and all of that too. So that I will link in the show notes if anybody's listening and wants to check that out. But yeah, it's just super cool to see the technology. I know kind of when I first got into the keto low carb space, I was, pricking my finger all the time. Just, I was nerding out on the data and stuff like that. And then getting the continuous glucose monitor. I don't wear one all the time, but I do, intermittently, just to kind of see where I'm at for like a 2-week period, or if I'm doing some type of specific experiment. I think it's a really good tool. And if anybody is listening, I do have a discount code for NutriSense, so you can go to their website. I'll link it in the show notes. It's Rachel25, and I believe it's like $25 off. But I will double check that.
It's $25 off a month with them. Yeah, I have one too. So yeah, that's perfect. And a lot of people use NutriSense and really like it because they get to work with a dietitian to help them, and not a classically trained dietitian, one who kind of knows their stuff about blood sugar. So I'll put that as a little caveat. And they really know their stuff and can help you interpret the data. So that's the benefit of working with them, because I have a lot of people who get CGMs from other places and they're like, okay, I don't know what to do with this information. Like, I don't know what's happening. So that's a real bonus of working with NutriSense. And another bonus about their sensors is that they test, I think a regular CGM tests every like 15 minutes, but I think that the NutriSense CGMs are a little bit more frequent than that. So you're getting more granular data of what your glucose is doing.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just super cool that you can just like literally look at your app, like, because it's an app on your phone and you can see what's happening, and like see that curve that's occurring and kind of match that with things that you're feeling. So yeah, that's super cool. Obviously technology is just getting better and better. So, yeah.
I wanted to just say one quick thing about the other benefit of having one of the finger prick meters too. There's several benefits of having both. First of all, sometimes the CGMs you were mentioning, it is a newer technology, right? And sometimes it's like, there's no way my blood sugar is like 40. I'd be dead. I'd be feeling it, right? And so sometimes these monitors, these meters can be a little bit off. And this is important for people who are struggling if they have blood sugar crashes or like if they are having issues with their blood sugar, right? So I recommend this to always verify, because sometimes these meters can trend high or low. Again, if you work with NutriSense, you can actually dial up or down the meter. But if you just get a Freestyle Libre, it might be running like 20 points low or 20 points high. And then you're thinking like, that's a big difference. That's a huge difference in your blood sugar. So it's really good to verify with the finger prick meter and be like, okay, I'm just going to mentally add 10 to whatever number I see. So then you get a better estimation of what your blood sugar is, because these are more accurate. And then the other thing is that these can test ketones. And as maybe your listeners know, we can't test insulin. We can't see what insulin is doing. We can only kind of guess. And so the closest we can come to knowing what insulin's doing is to be looking at the blood sugar numbers and the ketone numbers, because insulin has to be quite low in order for the liver to start even producing ketones. So when the liver is producing ketones, we can kind of estimate like, okay, my insulin has come down and this process has started again. So that's what I did a lot when I was doing keto. I was testing my ketones to make sure that even if my blood sugar went high, it didn't kind of kick me out of ketosis or whatever my blood sugar was doing. That was the metric that I was paying attention to. But if you only have the blood sugar thing, you can pay attention to that too by trying to keep those curves pretty low. So I usually recommend, there's not, again, a magic number. Their blood sugar could go up higher and others can, be lower, and it might kick them out of ketosis or not. But it's, again, learning your body. But a general range might be setting that green range on a CGM from like 70 to 1. I set mine at 110 because I look for optimization. So the average person, maybe like 120 might be good, but you really don't want to have it over 140. So if you're maybe closer to pre-diabetic, or you're not feeling very well at those lower blood sugar numbers, which is possible, to maybe set it up there. But the healthy person looking to optimize 70 to 110 is a really great place to be in, because that will almost guarantee that you'll probably be making ketones in that range. And you can get away with eating, once you become more metabolically flexible and you can tolerate more carbohydrates, you can still even add some carbohydrates in using some hacks, not let the blood sugar go high, and you can tolerate more to still keep that insulin low, which is really important.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned the hacks. I want to talk about that a little bit. So what are I personally don't like using the word hacks for certain things, because I'm like, people take it the wrong way. Oh, I can just hack this and hack that. But like, what are some actually useful
strategies?
Hacks? Yeah, strategies. That's a good word for it. To help manage blood sugar.
Yeah. So like I said, we want to keep the blood sugar from spiking super high. So certain strategies that I'll use is, the first one that comes to mind is apple cider vinegar. There's the vinegar, any vinegar, but you don't want to use balsamic because that's really sugary. Any vinegar will delay gastric emptying, which will help you to not have such a spike in blood sugar. And it helps to also reduce the insulin that is released after the meal. So if you don't want to chug some apple cider vinegar, which doesn't sound appealing to a lot of people, cinnamon can really help the taste. So just throwing that out there. But even using it as like a salad dressing or just in your meal, that can help too. And it could be anywhere in your meal, and that can really help the blood sugar to not spike so high. So you can look at like a comparison graph of the two, and you'll see that the one with the apple cider vinegar is significantly less. So it reduces that spike quite a bit, which is great. Another one is, you wanted to say something?
No, can you repeat like what? So I just want to make sure we hone in on this, because I know like, especially you see in the media, like, oh, take apple cider vinegar and you'll cure all your issues. So can you just explain like why, and you don't have to go too detailed into it, or just repeat what you said in the beginning, like why the vinegar is actually helping to do that again, just so everybody's on the same page?
Sure. So the acetic acid in the vinegar, and that's why it doesn't work with lemon juice. So both of them, lemon juice and apple cider vinegar, can help to raise your stomach acid if you have it before you eat, which is a good thing because most of us are super deficient in stomach acid. But only the vinegar what it does is, this is according to the research, it delays gastric emptying. So that way the sugar doesn't hit your blood so fast. And so it kind of makes it level out, and it reduces the blood sugar spikes from your meal, and it reduces the insulin response from the meal as well. And then the way I recommend having it for blood sugar purposes and digestion purposes is doing a tablespoon in just about an inch of water. You don't want to have it in a full glass of water. So some people will say, I have apple cider vinegar every morning in a big giant glass of water. That's not helping your blood sugar because you didn't have it right before your meal. But the other thing is that if we're thinking about digestive purposes, we don't want to have a huge giant glass of water right before the meal, because that's going to dilute our stomach acid. So if you just do it, and trust me, you're just going to want to take a shot of this. You're not going to want to drink.
Sip on it.
Sip on it. So like just a little, like in an inch of water, tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, pinch of cinnamon. I'm telling you, that does the trick. It makes it smell like apple pie, and you're like, oh, this isn't that bad. So try that. Have it right before your meal or during your meal. If you forget, that's fine too. Make sense?
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, that was great.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, you can continue to the next one. Sorry.
Okay, sure. So then the next one I would say, which is really great, is to focus on the order in which you eat your foods. So we always want to just save our carbs for last. So if you're having a meal, if you're having non-starchy veggies, that could be a really good thing to add. So even like a veggie starter to a meal, if you're kind of in a bind, let's say you're on vacation, you're traveling and you don't have all the things, if you have like a small salad, some broccoli, some avocado and olives or something, you have some sort of a green vegetable first, the fiber in there helps to, again, slow the absorption of the sugar. So starting with any non-starchy veggies that you have, can be raw, can be cooked, depending on your preference. And then eating your fats and proteins. And a lot of times those are packaged together in nature. So something like a steak and, an avocado, something like that. And then you would eat the carbs last. And that has a huge impact on the blood sugar, keeping it low. So even if you mix it, so let's say you're having rice and you have the rice mixed with the proteins and the fats, that would be like a medium curve. So the worst would be rice first. Second worst is rice mixed, and best would be rice last. And so that it just really has a big, big impact. So combining these hacks can really help as well. So you have some apple cider vinegar, you have the veggie starter, you put the apple cider vinegar on the salad or something. Dressing, and then you have your fats and proteins, and then you save your carbs for last. And it is a huge difference in what your blood sugar does, which can help to prevent these things like the crashes and the cravings and all that come with it. Another one would be no naked carbs. And this is probably going to be a little different for athletes because it depends, but I'm not sure where you fall on that. But in general, especially if it's like not a workout day, and especially if you're really working on gaining metabolic flexibility, you're not there yet. I would say that no naked carbs is a really good rule, because naked carbs would be a carb by itself. So just a banana, just an apple, just a sweet potato. This will really spike you. And adding then there's this gray area where it's like, oh, well, what if I have peanut butter with an apple? a few tablespoons of peanut butter is not going to do enough to sort of curb that whole apple. So I would say the quantity of the carbs is really going to matter as well. And that's going to be very individual and based on your tolerance. And so, an apple with peanut butter, it's better than a naked carb, definitely better. And for some people, it's okay. But an apple with peanut butter would still totally spike me. So just keep in mind the quantity matters as well. And so sometimes you can have like a few bites of something and it's a total flat line of your blood sugar. And then you have a cup of it, like a cup of rice, and it's like a huge mountain. So keeping in mind, finding the quantity that works for you. And then using your muscles. So workouts, when you work out before a meal, you will use up that you're working out and then you eat, you have better insulin sensitivity. And so the muscles are kind of depleted of their glycogen. And so they just sort of like suck the sugar back up and it doesn't really impact your blood sugar. So that's amazing. So saving your carbs for after a workout could be a really good time to have them. And I'm not saying like you finish your workout, like go pound a shake or something, like give your body a chance to come back into parasympathetic rest and digest so you can digest well. So I don't know the exact window, but I would say maybe within 2 hours of eating might be a good time for that. And honestly, even after you work out, you're going to have better insulin sensitivity probably the whole day. So that would be really beneficial. And then workouts afterwards, or even just going for a walk. So you eat and then you think about, okay, I'm going to eat and then I'm going to use up the glucose that I just put in the system. That's a really great hack as well. So some, different influencers and people will say like, just go for a 10-minute walk. So one time I had banana ice cream and I just like blended a banana and put like a, coconut oil chocolate shell on top. It was really good. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk. And my blood sugar started to go up and then it flatlined and then it went up a lot. And so it was like, okay, a 10-minute walk for an entire banana, which is like 30 grams of carbs, was not enough. So 10-minute walk might not be enough, but again, depending on how many carbs you eat, you'd have to tailor the amount of exercise to the portion of carbs that you ate. And again, there's no like exact recipe because everyone's going to be a little different, but just know that use your muscles after you eat, after you work out, and it'll help your glucose be more flatlined.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Those are all great tips. And I completely agree about the naked carbs, even for athletes and even for myself, like as a pre-workout, if I'm having carbs in my pre-workout, a lot of people kind of forget about yes, you're going to use those carbs up in your workout. And even if you're, metabolically flexible, healthy, you still want to make sure that you're pairing that with at least some fat and protein, like you mentioned, because you don't want to have like that spike and then the crash when you're in the middle of your workout. So definitely always recommend doing that for sure. I wanted to ask too, so I have 2 questions, so I want to try to remember both. So the first one I want to ask is about, while we're on the subject of working out, can we talk a little bit about how not just carbohydrates, but some other factors as well can independently spike your blood sugar, under stress and obviously in a workout as well. If you're in a high intensity workout, like that in itself can spike your blood sugar, and that's normal. But there's probably some nuances within that. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So non-food causes of spikes. Some of those would be high intensity workouts, like you said, which is totally normal. It's a stressful state for our body. The body is going to liberate glucose into the system because it needs quick energy. So that's why we want to stay away from needing a flat line of glucose. Like we can over manage our blood sugar sometimes when we know, and we don't want to be doing that. We don't want to not do an appropriate workout for our body because we get a spike. If you're someone dealing with adrenal stuff, you probably don't want that spike. You probably, reactive hypoglycemia, if your blood sugar is crashing, you probably can't tolerate something like that. So we would dial down the workout so you wouldn't get a spike during a workout. So we're just, using more fat to fuel our workouts. Then we have things like acute stressors. So when I worked in an office, I was late to work and I was rushing around in the morning and I hadn't eaten, and I looked at my CGM and I had this like spike. I was like, what did I eat? I was like, oh, I didn't eat anything. It was the stress. So an acute stressor can cause stress. Again, that's the sympathetic nervous system. What it does is releases the glucose into the system because it thinks you need to fight and flight and get away. So it's giving you energy. So imagine we're sitting at a desk all day, sitting and getting super anxious, and our blood sugar is going up, but we're not using it. That can contribute to those spikes and those issues over time. Some other things would be things like heat. So in a shower and in like an infrared sauna, we can see that go up. And sometimes like the jury is still out, like, is it really increasing your blood sugar, or is it because it's bringing more of the fluid to the surface? So either way, infrared sauna is amazing for insulin sensitivity. So again, whether it spikes you or not, it's a good thing. The biggest spike I've ever had on a CGM was when I was here in Florida, kayaking in summer, putting away my kayak in like the middle of July, sweating. And I looked at my CGM and it was like 180. I was like, oh my goodness, I've never seen it this high. And it went down. I felt fine. And so it's just, again, like in the heat, it just made it go up quite a bit.
And you're like active. And so like all the things at once. Yeah.
All the things. Yeah. I was active. I was hot. And then, but it was totally fine. So those are the three I can think of. I can't really think of any more. I'm sure I will as soon as we hang up this call.
Yeah. So, okay, before I get to my other question, or two other questions, you mentioned reactive hypoglycemia. Can we chat about that a little bit in case anybody doesn't know what that is?
Yeah. So reactive hypoglycemia is when your blood sugar crashes anywhere from right after a meal to about 5 hours after a meal. If a lot of times these people are experiencing blood sugar crashes and their blood sugar appears to be in a normal, healthy range. So they'll go to their doctor and say, I feel really terrible. My blood sugar is crashing. And they're like, no, your blood sugar is 90. It's fine. And they're like, but I don't feel fine. And so you get all these symptoms of, anxiety, sweats, headaches, all these shakiness, feeling like you're going to die. That's what I get a lot. People are like, I just feel like I'm going to die. Sometimes it hits me out of nowhere. But a lot of people are really afraid to eat because they get crashes, but if they don't eat, they get crashes. So it's a really hard thing. And the advice out there is just terrible for reactive hypoglycemia. They tell them pair protein with a complex carb and eat every 2 to 3 hours. And that is going to make the disease process worse. They say nothing about fat. Fat is really what is going to help heal this, because we need to start fat burning. These people who have reactive hypoglycemia are stuck in such a sugar burning state. Their metabolisms are so inflexible. Usually it's due to high insulin levels plus adrenal issues. That's what I see in my practice. It's that these two things, yes, it can happen after like bariatric surgery, but that's not usually the population I'm working with, but they could be helped with this advice as well. But we really need to look at lowering insulin levels. So we need to not spike the blood sugar. We need to employ all those hacks, but they still will need a little bit of carb at the end of the meal, but they need lots of fats. And even sometimes they could be so sensitive to any little change in blood sugar that could cause so much insulin to be released that lean proteins will actually make them crash. So they need to have really fatty proteins, which is the same that we recommend with keto. It's like, don't have the chicken breast, have a chicken thigh with the skin on the bone, get all those fats. And sometimes even chicken is too lean. So sticking with red meats and fattier cuts can really, really help. A lot of protein powders can be really hard for people with reactive hypoglycemia. So if you notice, like, okay, I'm doing a workout and I have a protein shake after, I feel like I'm crashing, and I just don't feel well. It's like, this is something that could be going on because protein does have a small effect on our blood sugar and insulin. And this process is really driven by demand. And so the process is gluconeogenesis, where it takes the proteins, converts it to glucose. And in a person who is a sugar burner, the demand for the sugar is very high. So my theory is that in people with reactive hypoglycemia, they're very sensitive to the protein. And so that's why they do really well with high fat. And also we need to look at the adrenal component, because usually there's real big adrenal dysfunction and that the blood sugar just can't stay up.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, that makes sense. I think And I think we might have talked about this a little bit on your podcast, but I'm obviously a huge fan of protein, high protein. But I think there's obviously always going to be certain situations, specifically with reactive hypoglycemia, where you definitely have to watch that. So yeah, just kind of paying attention to some of the things that you just mentioned for sure. My other question, if I remember, I had two questions. Oh, I wanted to talk a little bit about fruit. So you mentioned in the beginning, obviously fruit is made from mostly fructose, and that obviously goes to the liver. And so yeah. So so this is actually one question so that we can kind of talk about with viewers and listeners. Because I know, like, I've had this question before too. How do we, first of all, like in terms of the amount of fruit that we're consuming, like do we just kind of regulate that based off of, if you're tracking your continuous glucose monitor, if you're using that, or just how you feel, the amount of fruit that you're consuming, that is going to be very individual, as you mentioned before, right?
Yeah. And I don't think that anyone who's metabolically healthy and wanting to consume some fruit should feel nervous about it. I mean, as long as we're not like pounding fruit all year round, like acai bowls and smoothies every single day, like, and those things get kind of dangerous because you wouldn't eat like this much fruit, but once you blend it, you can drink it. So just be mindful. Eating whole real fruits is always recommended over that. But I think that, small amounts of fruit here and there is going to be totally fine. Again, I don't have a specific number. I'm not aware of anything that the research is saying on that. But I think that if someone is dealing with, fatty liver and things like that, we need to look, okay, are a couple of raspberries going to be okay? Like it's going to be better than, a milkshake from McDonald's with high fructose corn syrup in it, so I just don't think it's something that should be super nitpicked, but it's something maybe to keep in mind. But personally, I do better with fruit than I do with starches. Starches, I don't digest as well. Starches are, for me, harder to digest because they contain long strings of glucose molecules. That's what starches are. And you have to break apart all those molecules. And I find that they're worse on my blood sugar, of course, because they're all glucose and not some fructose. And so they do require more insulin. And so it's, some people will say, oh, fruit destroys my stomach, things like that, like FODMAP issues, and they do better with grains or with starchy veggies. But I think it's really a matter of finding what works for you. But I don't think that, I know Paul Saladino, Carnivore MD, he's really into now organs, meats, fruits, and honey. So like, that's his 4 things. And, like there's so much different stuff. And I mean, sorry, there's a lot of thunder. I don't know if you could hear that.
No worries.
But, 'tis Florida. So, it's having fruit. Like I said, as long as we're not pounding it, I feel like if your blood sugar can handle the amount of fruit you're eating, that's probably a good sign. So eat fruit so that your blood sugar stays stable and you're not having cravings. And if you're in that range, I think that you're good to go. So I would take it back more to monitor the numbers on the blood sugar and your cravings, because sometimes sugars can lead to cravings like that. So if you have a handful of blueberries, are you like, give me a piece of chocolate cake? Like, is that the next thought? Because that used to be me. So it wasn't chocolate cake, but it was other stuff, so that would be.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you notice that different types of fruit? So like berries, right? Berries, maybe they have a little bit more fiber versus just maybe like a plain banana or like an apple without the skin. I'm just trying to think of like other fruits. I don't know. Have you noticed that with any of your clients? Like they do better with berries versus, like I said, a banana or?
Yeah. So the number of carbs in the fruit really, really matter. So Diet Doctor has a great website, Diet Doctor /low-carb. They have these visual guides and you can see how many carbs are in a fruit. And it's like based on 100 grams and whatever. So it's a good sort of just visual to see. So you don't have to go and Google every single fruit there is. And for example, the berries, for the most part, have the smallest amount of carbohydrates and things like lemons and whatever. And then some things that would be more on the medium side would be like apples and oranges and peaches. And then And the higher carb, higher sugar fruits would be things like the tropical fruits, like bananas, papayas, mangoes, things like that. And so I will notice a huge impact of something like a banana or mango. Like I had some mango the other day because it's almost mango season in Florida. And I had it as a carb up, and I had just a small quantity, maybe like the same amount that I'd have with berries. And I got a very significant spike. And so again, it really comes down to the number of carbs or how much sugar is in something. And then the other thing would be, there's individual differences. So I had a client and she said that she had a few bites of watermelon. She had it at the end of her meal. She had lots of fats and proteins first. And she said she had like 3 bites of watermelon and had a huge spike. Like it went up to like 180 or something crazy. So there's individual differences with people. So certain foods might spike us more than others. That's very rare. But again, it's good to know sort of how your body reacts, because the other thing I also think, and again, this is just my own theory based on in my practice, is that if you're eating something you're sensitive to, I don't think this happens every time, but if you're eating a food that you're quite sensitive to, that's going to cause your body to go into a sympathetic state. So if you do have that sympathetic activation, I feel like that could also potentially contribute to a bigger spike just because your body is stressed. So that's one of the other things that I tend to see.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that
just
kinda, that does make
I
sense.
don't know.
Yeah. So, and even when because you mentioned like she had that watermelon after the full meal. So like, for example, with the mango, like you had that with
After
fats
a
and
meal.
proteins. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, it's very interesting because I noticed like with myself, I mean, I tend to never try to eat like any naked carbs. So even fruit alone, I'll always pair it with something else. But I love watermelon and I sometimes eat that alone. And I actually haven't tested watermelon on the CGM. I haven't worn one for a while, but it's something that after this conversation, I'm just going to go put one on because I'm intrigued again. So I'm definitely going to test that out. But yeah, it definitely, I mean, more of the story is I kind of wanted to get this across, but there are a lot of people who tend to be they've heard things like I shouldn't ever eat fruit again or ever eat any type of fruit because fructose is going to cause all these issues. But we have to, what's the saying? Like the poisons in the dose.
The poison's in the dose. It really is.
Is that the saying? Yeah.
Yes,
so
the poison's
I didn't know
in the
if
dose,
I got that right.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. So that's a big thing. And, fruits have lots of nutrients in them and things like that. So don't be like completely scared and be like, oh, I can't ever have, a banana again or whatever it is. Just be smart about it. And like you said, pay attention to your individual reaction to that. Okay, I know we've been chatting for a little while and I feel like we could chat for another hour. But I do want to kind of end on one thing that we kind of touched on with the starches, but can we talk a little bit about resistant starch and how that may impact blood sugar?
Yeah, so resistant starch is a starch that doesn't impact the blood sugar. And when we put things that have starch in them, like rice and potatoes, if we cool those things after we cook them, it increases the amount of resistant starch in them. And so therefore, when we eat them, it'll have less of an impact on our blood sugar. There have been people who have done experiments with this, and some people have a lessening of the blood glucose curve and some people don't. So I wouldn't necessarily rely on that heavily. I think that we could tend to be like, oh, this will erase the carb. Like, oh, this is like free carbs. Like I can just eat all the rice I want. But if you're like, I'm going to eat rice, I may as well cook it, cool it, and then have that be my rice. Maybe you get a little bit of an extra portion that it won't impact your blood sugar quite as much. And again, everyone's going to be a little bit different, but that is a good thing that you can do. Again, another little hack to help the food not hit your blood sugar quite as hard.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I just want to touch on that too, because, we see things on the internet. Oh, resistant starch. If you just cook your sweet potato and then cool it overnight, it's magic, but
it's magic. Yeah. Yeah. None of these things are magic. And one of the things that I like to highlight, because, a lot of these hacks are really great and really helpful, but I always like to remind people that it's really important, the quality of the food that you're eating. So if I like to use the hacks on the regular because they help keep my blood sugar stable. And I like to use them if I'm sort of going off plan, if I'm on vacation, if I'm at a party, and it's like, cool, I can still I can indulge a little bit, but I'll just make sure that, I mean, some people will just like eat some broccoli before they leave the house. So then they get the greens and then they go to the party, whatever. There's this drink called Good Idea. And it's something that I've been having lately because it's just like a sparkling water and it's naturally flavored and it has amino acids and chromium in it. And that has the same impact as the apple cider vinegar. So if you can't get behind the taste of the ACV, it doesn't benefit your stomach acid, but it's like something that you can bring with you if you're going to the beach, going to a party, you're traveling. So again, like bringing these little hacks with us, just keeping it in mind. So it can be another helpful tool.
Yeah, for sure. And then that brought up one last question. Can we chat a little bit about glucose disposal agents, maybe? I don't know if you know any, you don't know. Mm-mm. Okay. So those are just there, and I don't know much about them either because I've never recommended, but it is a type of supplement that the idea behind it is that it's supposed to do what it says, glucose disposal agent.
Is it like Berberine?
Yeah, but they're like, so Berberine and some of the other ones out there, like there's actually specific supplements that have like a mixture of different things. I believe Berberine is probably the most common. But maybe we can talk about Berberine a little bit or.
So I feel like some of these supplements, I personally, like if I'm giving my clients or my students a supplement protocol, I focus really heavily on digestion and making sure that they're breaking down their food, that they're healing their gut so they can absorb nutrients, that they're improving the bacterial balance of their gut, because that's where you're seeing the huge improvement in how someone feels, because they can extract more nutrients from their food and they're causing less inflammation when the food hits the gut. And that's where I sort of focus a lot, like 90% of my recommendations for my clients. And then there are a few supplements that can help, but I mean, there's all different studies out there. One of them says that apple cider vinegar is just as effective as berberine. So it's like, I don't know. I personally haven't seen people have incredible results from these supplements. I feel that food and lifestyle matter so much more than a supplement when it comes to this. I do like myo and D-chiroinositol. You get like a blend of the two of them. That can be helpful for insulin sensitivity, and it can also be helpful for sleep. So that is one of my go-tos. And then just looking at what the blood sugar regulation system needs, like it runs on nutrients. We need B vitamins, we need magnesium, we need minerals like chromium and zinc. So we need a lot of nutrients in order to power the blood sugar regulating system. So I find that thinking that we can take this supplement like cinnamon, for example, it's like, yeah, there's research on cinnamon, but like, is that really helping anyone that much? Like, I don't hear of people being like, oh my goodness, I started taking cinnamon and I feel so much better. I don't hear it. So it's like, I want people to spend their money on supplements that actually work and things that actually work. Like when I can see, oh, this Good Idea lowered my blood glucose response 30% from this meal, that's really worth it for me. To me, that's more than any supplement can do because I didn't get the glucose there in the first place. So those are just my personal preferences from, my work in this area with that. But yeah, so certain supplements I feel like might be a little overrated, but yeah, I don't know. Or maybe they help. I don't know.
No, I completely agree. I mean, no supplement is going to do the work for you. I always say that. And they can be tools in the toolbox. I used to be completely against supplements like years ago. And then I started experimenting with certain ones just from like and this could be a whole podcast on its own, but just like some things that I realized I wasn't getting in my diet, even though I, eat a healthy whole foods diet most of 80 to 90% of the time. I tend to eat the same vegetables just because I like them, the same 5-ish vegetables throughout the week. So I'm kind of missing out on a little bit of variety. So I feel like in that sense, supplements can be kind of like an insurance policy for certain things. There are obviously other, and again, this could be its own podcast on its own, but when we're talking about like blood sugar regulation and things like that, like you hit the nail on the head. You have to, like we talked about when we first started this, the root cause, like find that and change the things that are going to be the things that are going to last forever, right? Going to last for your whole lifestyle. Because if you just take a supplement, maybe even if it does help for a week or whatever, like, what do you do next? Right. So you have to, find the root cause and find the lifestyle adjustments that need to happen from your nutrition, from your stress management, from your exercise, all that jazz. So
Yep.
do you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So I think we talked for a while. I have had some other questions, but maybe we'll do like a part 2 or something, because we might get a bunch of questions from this. That's something I've done in the past. I've gotten questions from listeners about something they heard or they didn't understand. So we'll definitely look out for that if anybody's listening and they wanted to dive deeper into a specific subject, or is there something that we talked about that was confusing, we can definitely do a part 2. If you're down for that, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Cool. So I'm going to end on one question that I typically ask. It's putting you on the spot here a little bit, but don't worry, it's not anything crazy. So is there anything that you've changed your mind about in the last year? And it doesn't have to be like, it can be anything.
Already. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything that you've changed your mind about in the past year related to anything at all, and why?
Well, oh God, there's so many things that are coming to mind. I need to feel, not so many things, but okay. I think I'm going to have to go with, can I do it something that I underestimated?
Yeah, anything, whatever you want.
Well, maybe I'll do this one. So I kind of thought that when I first started keto, that it's like, okay, I need to be in ketosis forever because that is what helped me heal. And as more research is coming out and as I'm, experiencing it in my body, keto long-term is not actually super healthy. Strict keto, never coming out of keto. That's what I mean by that. So I intuitively started adding carbs back in after about 2 years of doing pretty strict keto. And I just felt like I needed them. I didn't have carb cravings at that point, but I felt like, wow, something's calling me to eat carbohydrates again. And I felt really good doing it. And wouldn't you know, I could tolerate them. I couldn't tolerate them before. So, and I almost had become a little bit metabolically inflexible. So my blood sugar would kind of go up quite a bit. And I was like, oh, wow, good thing I'm not, I wasn't eating all these carbs for this long because I see that I don't really tolerate them. But what's happened now is that I've regained metabolic flexibility. So now I can burn the glucose as well as the fats. And it's really been amazing to flex in and out of ketosis, because this is where this feels like much more of a sustainable lifestyle, because you can, keto is like, it's a really therapeutic healing diet, and it is a tool. And I think we need it at certain times in our life, and it would be biologically appropriate at certain times, but it wouldn't be biologically appropriate all the time for most people, right? So someone who has like a seizure disorder and needs it all the time, great, perfect. I'm so glad it's working. But for the average person who doesn't struggle with neurological issues to that extent, like our ancestors would have gone into ketosis every winter, but if they saw a berry bush and a honeycomb in the summer, they're not going to be like, no, I'm in keto. What? Yeah. No. So, and especially for women, we have menstrual cycles, even postmenopausal women have so many benefits of flexing in and out of ketosis. And there are benefits to carbohydrates. So I think what I changed my mind on from the very start of when I was in keto is that carbs are not to be demonized. They're a tool, just like keto is, and fasting is, and exercise is. So we need to know what the game then becomes, like, what's the appropriate amount for my body right now? And tomorrow it's going to be different. So people are always asking me, what should my macros be? I don't know. It's going to change, like it's just going to change all the time. And so the most important thing you can do is dial in how you feel and work to get rid of things like cravings and get out that processed food, because processed food is going to totally hijack your brain and your cravings. So you're not going to know what your body really needs. So when you get all that out and you're super balanced and you're not having these blood sugar swings, then the intuition that I need carbs today, wouldn't you know, my cycle is coming tomorrow. Like it kind of works. And then you're able to sort of, and with these hacks and things like that, you can have your carbs and eat them too, because you can still have them. And then I wake up and I'm in ketosis, and maybe I'm not in ketosis during the day, but now it's nourishing to my adrenals and my thyroid and my hair and things like that. And so I think it's really cool to find a good balance like that. So that would be what I changed my mind on. Yeah.
No, I love it. I love it. I mean, that's pretty much why I started this podcast, because I came to that same conclusion. So I love it. Awesome. Preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, this was a great conversation. Do you want to tell our viewers and listeners where they can find you, like social media, website, all that jazz?
Yeah, sure. So I hang out a lot on Instagram, Danielle Hamilton Health, and my website is daniellehamiltonhealth.com. And my podcast is Unlock the Sugar Shackles. And you are a guest on there. You're going to be my guest. It's coming out next week. So yeah. And then my signature program is Blood Sugar Mastery. It's an 8-week program. And there's group coaching. You have lifetime access to all the videos and things. And if you're interested in, really learning how to dial in your blood sugar and even support things like digestion and adrenals and your gut and things like that, that's something that we dive really deep into in the program. So yeah.
Awesome. I love it. I'll link all of that in the show notes so everybody can check it out. This was great. So maybe we'll have a part 2.
Sounds
we'll
good.
See. But I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll for sure talk to you soon. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of MetFlex and Chill. I hope you enjoyed it. It would be awesome if you could give the show 5 stars and leave a review on iTunes. We're trying to get placed in the top 100 health podcasts, and the 5-star ratings and reviews are what can help make that happen. I'll add step-by-step directions for leaving a review in the show notes. I know it's a big ask, but it really helps. Thanks again. See you next time.